Welcome back, everybody. It's been a minute, but it's finally time to get back on the Jeep. Where I stopped off before is I got the suspension work all taken care of. Got tires and wheels on there. I've since had the axles re-geared, so I've got 513s in there now. One thing you'll notice that is missing still is there's nothing there inside the knuckle. So I've got the stub shaft in there, but that's it. So unfortunately, when I was doing everything, I knew I was kind of on a little bit of a time crunch. I had to get the Jeep back together. Again, it's my daily driver, so I had to have the thing rolling, come that Monday or whatever. So my RCVs were actually on back order, so they weren't in just yet. And so I got the gears and everything done. I knew I wouldn't be able to get up the hill and go wheeling for a little bit. Throw everything together, driving down the road. I've got a bunch of miles on it already. But now it's time to get this thing done because I want to get out in the dirt. Like I said, one thing that I need to get in there is some axles in the front end, so I actually have four-wheel drive. I went RCV. I've run RCV for years. They just make a fantastic product. This is their 300M kit. These things will hold up real well. I believe that they warranty them for up to a 43-inch tire, which is super cool that the axle shafts will last up to a 43-inch tire. I just don't think that housing is going to hold up to a 43-inch tire if you're actually using the stuff. So I'm good with the 38s that I've got, and we'll go with that. You can see I got my front end fender chop done. That worked out real well. On the back end, I've got my liners pulled out, but you'll see I don't have an aftermarket liner in there to protect everything, and I want to make sure like my fuel line's protected. On the other side, there's some wiring and stuff, so I got to get those in there. What I've got Yukon rear axle shafts. Again, not a huge tire with the 38, but I want to make sure everything's going to last as well as it can, so I got to get those things built out and swapped in too. I've also got my JE real front drive shaft I've got to throw in there. I've already got the rear shaft in, but now we got to get the front in. So enough with parts on the shelf. Let's get parts on the Jeep and get this thing out the dirt. I've done this a couple times already. I've got to kind of break out the outer end of the knuckle here so that I can get that little stub shaft out and then get the new axle shafts in. More of the same. You're probably wondering what the point is of having the outer axle shaft still bolted into the unit bearing versus just taking everything out, leaving it out. Well, the problem is with most unit bearings is they actually have to have something holding it together. There's usually not like tons of snap rings and stuff like that that hold everything together. So if you leave that axle shaft out, you leave that nut off, so it's just the unit bearing sitting down there, and you start to drive, those unit bearings will actually separate. So this outer flange that your wheel bolts to will separate from the inner flange because there's nothing physically holding them together. So that's something good to remember. If you're on the trail, you break an inner axle shaft, but your outer is still good, something along those lines, make sure you make the effort to separate the inner axle shaft from the outer and bolt the inner axle shaft back in, or leave it bolted in and just separate the inner. You want to make sure to pull that nut off because it can be a little bit of a bear if you're trying to take it off and it's not held by anything. You're trying to hold everything in your hands. So it's just a little bit easier to do it with the flange still bolted to the axle housing. And then you just pull the unit bearing out. There's the inner axle shaft, and it just slips right out, or the outer axle shaft, and it just comes right out. Now for the RCV. U-joints work absolutely fine. Most drive shafts still use U-joints. The one thing that you can have an issue with a U-joint is if this is my axle shaft, when I'm turning, you can see I'm actually changing how that's going to spin and rotate. So it's going to change how that U-joint is operating, and you'll actually a lot of times kind of get a kunk, kunk, kunk as the axle shaft is spinning and you're turned and you're going around. So it can put more load and bind on the axle shafts. You can get braking when you're turned like that, so it does cause wear. Now, RCV is basically like a Rockwell 2.5 ton CV shaft, or like Toyotas for the longest time when they had solid axles, they were all Burfields, which is a CV shaft. If you look, you can kind of see they put a lot of grease in these things, but you can see there's these 6 notches all the way around, and then there's this inner cage piece. The inner cage piece has 6 notches on the other side as well, and then there's actually 6 ball bearings that go in there. The ball bearings allow so that as you're turned, you've still got 100% of contact on each of those pieces, so you're not getting that notchiness. My opinion, RCV, pretty much some of the best aftermarket axle shafts that you can get. They just hold up real well, steer real nice, just a fantastic piece. So let's take a look at getting these things put together. It's going to be kind of hard to see, but if you look in here, you can kind of see that inner star piece, and then in the middle of that, that's where the axle shaft's going to go. On the inside of that star, there's a female receiver groove. This snap ring, you can see it kind of sticks up if I push it up there. It's going to go inside that CV, and then that snap ring, it closes down as it passes through the outer part of that star, and then once it gets to that female receiver groove, it springs out, so it kind of holds it in there. So when you get them put together, they won't pull back apart. There's different ways that you can put these things together. In the Toyota world, it's usually just beat them and make them go together, and it works just fine. You can do that here. I mean, they'll hold up. They're not going to break or anything. But the only issue that I have, and I always did with the Toyota stuff too, is you see the snap ring, it can be pushed offset and elongated kind of. So if it's over like that and you start slamming on it, you could catch the snap ring, you could snap the snap ring. I don't like to go that route. So what I tend to do is I take my CV and I'll set in my vise. And again, you can see I'm protecting the shaft, the threads, so that's not going to get galled. I'm not clamping down like crazy. I just need this to basically kind of hold it upright. You can see it's still loose in there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the axle shaft into the CV, and then I'm going to use my screwdriver and basically holding pressure down on the axle shaft. It is going to basically put friction on that the clip. So I'll be able to take my screwdriver and just kind of work it around and just push it in, and then I'll be able to drop right in. I'll get you guys in closer so you can see. Again, I just start my axle shaft. So it's sitting down on top of that star. And I just take my screwdriver around and just kind of push in as I'm gently applying pressure down. Little nudge, and you can see it's pushed in. So you can see also when you push down, it's going to shove that grease down in, which pushes it out around those balls. So it just adds that lubrication. But again, it's in there, not going anywhere. I'm going to start the shaft in, and I'm going to take the boot for the RCV, smear grease everywhere, make a good mess. I mean, that's the tough part about a CV joint over a regular U-joint axle shaft, is you do have a lot of grease to deal with, so you can end up with a decent mess. I'm going to put the boot through the knuckle, because with the boot on the shaft it actually won't slip through the knuckle. So we just push that through right there, and I'm going to keep sending the shaft through. Next up, I have to get the boot to come up over the CV. And so you can see I pushed in and it started to go, but then it popped right back out. So you just got to make sure that you get it to actually fully seat. There it goes. All right, put it all back together. Now my inner shaft on the passenger side has to go through the seal, and then it's going to go through the opening on the FAD motor. So what I want to do on this is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lubricate the seal here. I'm going to lubricate all the way through, because this whole section is going through that seal, so I don't want that to tear the seal, any of these ridges here, and definitely not the splines where the FAD collar goes. So I'm going to take a couple seconds, make sure that's all going to go in nice and smooth. And same thing with the splines for the FAD collar. I'm going to throw a little bit of lubrication on that, a little bit of grease. That way that collar is going to not have an issue right when it gets going. It does have this brass bushing or bronze bushing right there that the other shaft will ride in. I'm going to start by feeding it in from the outside, crawl back underneath, and then I can take it all the way in from there so that it gets that into the intersection. All right, fad motor protected. Next up, drive shaft. I got JU reel shafts, front and rear. I already got the rear one in, but I've been using these things for a long time on different vehicles. I've had them on 1-tons and 42s and on 39s, and they held up great. This one, 1350 CV at this end, 1350 U-joint at that end. I just prefer going for the beef if you can. 1310, meh. 1330, a little bit better, but for me, go 1350 and be done with it. Now, before I get too far, one thing I like to do with the drive shaft, if it's got caps that are not protected, that don't have an end on it that's basically got them encapsulated, I like to grab a little bit of tape, throw it around there. Reason being, if one of those caps pops off while you're monkeying around with the other end, then you lose needles. And you rarely find all the needles. So a little bit of tape, hold the caps on, slap that sucker in on the other end, and then peel the tape on this end and throw it up in there. On a positive note, at least there is very little space up here for people with the big meaty mitts to barely be able to get this bolt to be turning. It's all right, it's going. So when I had my gear set up in the front end, I took the flange for this drive shaft to my gear guy, and that way he was able to just set it up with that, and I didn't have to take it apart and risk messing up that crush sleeve by changing that out after the fact. So saved a step for me. He had to put in a flange anyway, so I just had him put in the new one. And while he was doing the gears and I was doing everything else, I just went ahead and swapped out the flange on the T-case. That way that was all done and good to go. Wait till the elbow clicks. There it is. So now we're back in two-wheel drive, so you can spin, so you can get this U-joint lined up with that yoke. Run it in there. There's that one. And there's that one. Now, because the Jeep's lifted up, it's got plenty of clearance around the links, around the engine, all that stuff. I shouldn't have to put it back into two-wheel drive, spin the shaft, and then be able to tighten the top ones. If you're working on a lower vehicle, probably have to. My old C10 that I had, thing was down at, I don't know, it's 5.5 inches front, 8 inches in the back drop. And yeah, that thing was fun to work under. But it was a blast to drive, and that's what matters. For the rear end, you don't necessarily need to run fender liners, but for me, I think it kind of makes sense. Get in here and check it out. If you look on this side, you can see we've got some plumbing. There's a little bit of electrical back in there. By all means, you can leave it exposed, but you're risking all this kind of stuff getting smashed, beat up, whatever. On the other side, you've actually got your fuel line that comes from the fill nozzle down here, and then it goes down the frame. So definitely a good idea to get a liner in there, keep that thing covered up. Anytime that you're drilling through sheet metal, your drill bit can always grab and just send it right through. So you want to be careful, especially when you've got a fuel line sitting on the backside here. What I like to do with something like that, take a chunk of something hard that's not going to allow the drill bit to pass through it. And that way, if that sheet metal grabs the bit and just sends it through, it's going to run into this plate a 1/4 inch before it actually gets to the rubber of the fuel line. Now that I got all 3 holes drilled out, there's now raw sheet metal in there because I basically drilled away the painted surface. So I want to make sure that I get that sealed up. So I'm just going to take a little bit of spray paint into my cap. I'm just going to brush a little bit of paint in there. And that'll make sure that that's protected and doesn't get messed up from any water, mud, snow, anything that gets around it. Now the paint's protected, now I can start putting in the rib nuts. Now I've got my liners all fully assembled. I even threw some undercoating on there as well, some nice fingerprints too. So they're assembled, but what I did is I left everything loose. They're snug to get in there, so I want to make sure I've got as much wiggle room as I possibly can get out of them. There's not much, but still take as much as I can get. My hole's not quite lined up. It's really close, but it's not quite there. So one thing that you can do, especially in sheet metal, is if you got threads on the backside, is put your tap into your drill, get it as close to lined up as you can, and then don't shove it in there, but get your tap lined up, and then gently feed it into those threads. And what it'll do is it'll actually tap the sheet metal just a little bit. and give you just that little extra wiggle room to get your hardware in. You're not making the hole huge for it to fit. You're just basically adding just a little bit of clearance for your hardware to start in there. And then it gets going, no problem. So I'm going to do one side at a time to try and keep the gear oil in the diff as much as possible, or in the axle housing as much as possible. So I've got this side lifted up so it'll kind of send the gear oil back that way. Let's see if it'll work. Now the Yukon shafts are double drilled, so they've got 2 different 5-bolt patterns on there. So what I like to do is just take the old shaft, support it, set the new one over the top, and just kind of spin until you find the set that it drops down on. And then just grab a Sharpie and mark the holes. But that way I make sure I put the studs in the correct holes and I don't have to drive them back out. When I'm doing an axle shaft, what I like to do is I have my stock shaft that's right there. This way I can see everything that I've got. I've got my tone ring, I got the little slinger there, the flange, the seal, the bearing and race, and then that little spacer that this piece actually just presses on. So that kind of locks everything in place. What I do there is then I've got my tone ring. Again, I've got it in the same orientation as the stock one. And I've got that little slinger there, my flange, I've got my seal, and then the bearing and race, and then I've just got that little lock there. So everything's kind of set out so that as I start pushing it together, hopefully I'll end up with what I've got there. Got the shaft all built out. Now it's just a matter of putting everything back together how it came out. At some point I am going to have to look at a brake upgrade. Love to do slotted. I'm not a huge fan of drilled, but I do like slotted. You guys have any good ideas on that? Let me know in the comments. There we go. Got our fancy little polar bear sitting on that axle shaft now. So after my heat cycles on the new gear set, and I got about 1,000, 1,200 miles on there, I'm going to go ahead and drain the fluid, take a look at what's going on in there. Of course, with these diffs, you can just use the drain plugs, because there's a drain plug on the front side of the rear Dana 44, and then you got the fill plug on the side, so really you don't have to pull the cover. Me, because it's a new gear set, I want to pop the cover and see what the pattern's looking like, make sure everything still looks good. See my little underbite from Fins and Things. And again here, I'm not at all worried about like this little paste junk. I don't know if you can actually see that. That's in there. Again, paste is okay. Chunks, no good. Again, after that initial break-in, I like to pop the cover so you can actually put eyes on the gears, see what the pattern is. We'll look at that here in just a little bit, see what the fluid looks like. The gear oil is actually black, but the gears that I put in here, they're Yukon gear sets. Yukon has some kind of like black oxide coating that they put on all their gear sets. And so when they very first break in, that stuff comes off the gears. So a lot of times when you're first breaking in a Yukon gear set, you're going to have that black stuff that just mixes with the gear oil, so it makes it look real black. But again, no problems there. There's no chunks. So far so good. No chunks in the bottom of the housing. Now let's get in there and see what that pattern's looking like. Alright, so I don't know if you can really see it, but if you look, you can see it's nice and even, toe to heel on there. There's actually a little bit of marking compound still from when the gears were initially set up, but you can see it's just a real nice pattern, evenly spread, wearing in real nicely, so I'm real happy with that. Alright, all cleaned up, pattern checked, put it all back together. Don't forget to put something there to catch whatever comes out. Next up is my rear pinch seams. Let's take a look. As you look in the wheel opening here, you can see tires down here, but as the suspension kind of swings back up, you can see this part of the sheet metal right here. This is the pinch seam. There's an inner piece of sheet metal and then the outer. They pinch them together and they do some little fuse welds to them. So as the tire swings back, this corner here, it's really common for the tire to actually catch on that. So I want to go ahead and trim that before I start shoving my fancy new tires into that and just tear them up. So if you look, you can see there's a bunch of these little spot welds, fusion welds, whatever you want to call them. And those are pinching the two pieces of sheet metal together. So I want to try and retain as many of those as possible, but I do want to get the clearance. So I'm going to actually have to get rid of some of this corner here. So this is what I've come up with on the other side. I don't want to make it look too hack. I mean, we are cutting the body, but I want to make it kind of look as clean as possible. I want to keep as many of the welds as I can. So if you look, first thing I did is I put some blue masking tape up here. Put the tape up here because that's also going to help when I cut. It's not going to just really chip the paint out and everything. So put up my blue tape, and then I just kind of started messing with some measurements and stuff. There's some stuff going on the back side here. You can kind of see some variances in the sheet metal there. So I'm kind of trying to play with that. I don't want to cut too deep into some of that stuff, but I want to cut enough where I'm going to be able to get rid of material so I'm not getting my tire into it. If you look from the factory, there's 3 layers of sheet metal there, but they've actually got these gaps. My suspicion is they're probably for drainage, for water drainage, getting dirt, mud, and junk out of it. So I've got those 3 gaps there, which again, I've got the corresponding gaps on this side, so I'm not super worried about filling those gaps. If I fill them, I'm actually taking away what the factory was trying to do. So I'm actually going to leave those gaps and Looking at the sheet metal, it's still pretty firm. That's now raw metal. I'm gonna make sure it's all good to go, but I'm gonna go ahead and sand it, clean it up so it's not, right now it's a little bit rough. It's got some burrs and stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean that stuff up, and then I'll throw a little bit of paint on there. So there we go. That's what we ended up with. A little bit of a radius on the bottom, so it looks kind of clean. And as a reminder, that's what we started with. A little bit more chunky, a little squared off. So we got the RCVs in there up front, got the Yukon shafts in the back, a little bit of tire clearancing here and there, a couple of other things thrown in the mix. Next up, we got to get it on the trail, see how everything works, see how everything's fitting, make sure there's not rubbing or anything like that going on. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of my part selections that I've got going on this. I'm pretty pumped, pretty happy with everything. We're going to see how everything works and we'll make a final decision there. But I'm pretty happy with all the parts I've got going on. Other than that, give us a like, follow the channel. We'll catch you guys out there on the next one.